Next time,
Should be a nice relaxing weekend.
Let's hope so.
when Father Brown goes to a holiday camp,
Rise and shine.
the proprietor is murdered.
She's been strangled. I'm well aware of that, thank you.
Father Brown.
Saturday at 7 on WTTW.
The WTTW Great Treasure Hunt Sweepstakes is here. Enter now for your chance to win the grand prize, an all-new 2023 Subaru Crosstrek from our friends at McGrath Evanston Subaru. Explore the city streets and beyond with spacious and comfortable interior, state-of-the-art safety features, and adventure-ready design. Don't delay. Enter now for your chance to win. Visit WTTW.com/sweepstakes.
Programming on WTTW is made possible in part by viewers like you and by the following.
Chicago is home. Home to a health system whose physicians and staff reflect the diversity of the communities we serve, strengthening the bond between you and your care team. A system that strives to make sure expert healthcare is accessible at clinics throughout the region, and facilities like our new specialty care building, opening this fall in the heart of the Illinois Medical District. We're building a healthier future for you. We are UI Health.
WTTW programming originates from the Renee Crown Public Media Center. Programming on WTTW is made possible in part by Northern Trust, supporting the arts in our communities for more than 130 years.
Next time,
Get me Shakespeare and Hathaway.
a private eye is the prime suspect for murder.
Most of the time, I operate in LA.
But Frank and Lou aren't sure about their client.
Maybe the police have the right man.
Shakespeare and Hathaway.
Saturday at 8 on WTTW.
Hi, Chicago! You're watching WTTW!
Good evening and welcome to Chicago Tonight. I'm Paris Schutz. Brandis Friedman has the evening off. On the show tonight.
Chicago isn't just a world-class city. It's an incredibly important and attractive place for Google to deepen our roots in.
Google makes the Heart of the Loop its new home, preserving the much-loved and loathed Thompson Center.
I have a lot of respect for Congresswoman Kelly and support her in many ways.
Governor Pritzker says he backs Congresswoman Kelly, but not as chair of the state's Democratic Party. Russia says it's pulling out of the International Space Station and ending its partnership with NASA, what that means for the U.S. It's hot out there for everyone, but especially for outdoor workers. We talk about how to stay safe when working in the heat. A captive coyote in Cook County gets some changes to his living situation after advocates were concerned about his well-being. Artists from Chicago and Ukraine join forces in a cry of protest against the ongoing hostilities in Ukraine.
If we couldn't have this year-round, I think we can directly have an impact on violence.
And hear about a basketball camp that is taking back Chicago streets while creating safe spaces for kids. But first, some of today's top stories. A Lake County grand jury has indicted the alleged Highland Park shooter on 117 felony counts. Robert Cremo III is now charged with 21 counts of murder, 3 counts for each victim killed in the July 4th parade massacre. He's facing an additional 48 counts of attempted murder and 48 counts of aggravated battery with a firearm, 1 for each victim who was struck. Cremo was arrested on July 4th, hours after police say he used an assault-style rifle to kill 7 people and injure dozens more. He's due back in court next week. With Chicago at high COVID-19 levels, Chicago Public Schools is, quote, strongly recommending masks for the new school year, but they will not mandate them. The policy is similar to the district's COVID protocols at the end of last school year, according to school CEO Pedro Martinez. CPS will also continue its weekly in-school testing program, and take-home tests will be available to students as well. School starts a week earlier than last year on August 22nd. Meanwhile, 2 CPS teachers who were set to lose their jobs for encouraging their students to protest a metal shredding company will keep their moves. Early this morning, the Chicago Teachers Union protested the recommended firings, calling their ouster, quote, vindictive.
This is retaliation because we have two educators who stood lockstep with their students, their families, and their communities to challenge the racism of relocating a pollutant that Lincoln Park didn't want anymore.
But the Chicago Board of Education voted later in the afternoon unanimously to keep those two George Washington High School teachers. The teachers were active in protesting that shredding facilities plan move from Lincoln Park to the southeast side, which is about a half a mile from the school. Lightfoot administration ultimately rejected the company's permit after years of demonstrations. You can officially call it the Mega Billion Lottery jackpot. The Mega Millions pot is now tapped $1 billion, only the fourth time that's ever happened. If you win, you can choose to receive your billion-dollar prize winnings to be paid annually over 30 years. However, most winners opt for that one-time cash payout option, which before taxes is estimated at a lot less than that $1 billion, just a paltry $602 million. Your chances of winning the jackpot, about 1 in 303 million. The next drawing is at 10 p.m. on Friday. Good luck. And up next, the latest on the sale of the Thompson Center to Google. So please stay with us.
Chicago Tonight is made possible in part by Alexandra and John Nichols, the Jim and Kay Mabey family, the Polk Brothers Foundation, and the support of these donors.
If you Google the Thompson Center, you're liable to find admiration and hate for the iconic Helmut Jahn building. Well, officials announced this morning that that iconic building will become the new home of Google. The state of Illinois has successfully sold it and won't have to foot the bill for costly renovations required to get that building up to date. And here to talk about the announcement and the building's renovations are Bonnie McDonald, President and CEO of Landmarks Illinois, and Elizabeth Blashes, an architectural historian and co-founder of Preservation Futures. We also invited the developer and a representative from the governor's office or Google to join this conversation, but they declined our request. We do appreciate the two of you being here. Bonnie McDonald, from a preservation standpoint, is this good news for the city?
Yes, Paris, we believe this is great news for the city, not only for the Thompson Center, which we're passionate about seeing an adaptive reuse of the building as one of our icons of postmodernism, but it's good for the entire downtown with the number of employees that will come in to reuse this, important building, and also bring some much needed vitality to the other buildings in the central business district.
Elizabeth Blashes, how important was it to preserve this design? Because as we mentioned, some people love it, some people not so much.
The James R. Thompson Center has social, historical, and architectural significance. It's a place of public protest and activism. It's served that way for the people of Illinois and Chicago since 1985, since it was built. It is a very significant work by architect Helmut Jahn, who was tragically killed in a bike crash in 2021. And it's also it's already a de facto landmark in Chicago's Loop.
And we should mention it's a $105 million deal. As part of it, the city is going to get the state is going to get $75 million to relocate offices a couple blocks away to the former BMO Harris building. Bonnie McDonald, is $105 million a good price? It seems a little bit low given the real estate and the size of the building.
I do think that is a question that is outside of my realm as a nonprofit executive director. We don't usually deal in real estate at that realm of 1.2 million square feet. But I would say that what is really important here is that the state is going to have the building sold, which is something that they desired. They will get other office space, which is a benefit to them. And the city continues to keep one of its most iconic structures. We have the CTA station, which will not be disrupted. Those leasehold, the leases may continue in the basement or the lower level area as well. This is really holistically a great reuse for a building that has, such a presence in our downtown. So now we have this building for the first time in many, many years, adding to the local property tax base as well, because the state wasn't paying property taxes. So now CPS is going to be getting a benefit from it, the local taxpayers as well. just see it as a win-win.
Right, state estimating something like $25 or $30 million a year added to the property tax base. Elizabeth Blashes, what would you like to see in a renovation here? Because I think everyone agrees that the building isn't going to work as it is. It needs a lot of work, but what do you want to see to make sure it keeps that sort of iconic status?
It's great that Prime Group and Google see the value in the building, and the firm Helmut Jahn's architecture firm, their involvement is really promising. I personally, since the building is it's a public asset, it's been owned by the state for many years. It has a public transit component, it has a public space component. The folks that are familiar with the Thompson Center know that the food court is a place where you can go and get an affordable lunch. You can kind of exist in the building without being over-policed, or you can use the bathrooms. There are public bathrooms there. There's the DMV. So personally, I would love, since the building, really it's a public building, and it's also it's a place where people in Illinois and Chicago have gone to petition their government, to protest their government in various ways. I'd love to see the public component, some sort of public component of the building preserved, just from a social standpoint. From an architectural standpoint, I would love for the James R. Thompson Center to undergo a Monadnock building or Reliance building level historic renovation, but that might not be what we end up getting here. This is really just it's a 21st century preservation outcome. And what's important for me to remember, and I think for people to really take home, is that adaptive reuse ensures that buildings get future iterations beyond what they were purpose built for. So Google might be the next tenant in the Thompson Center, but once Google moves, there's a whole other iteration that could happen to the Thompson Center, and the building not being demolished keeps it open for that.
So there might be future uses for that building to take into consideration. Bonnie McDonald, do we know, I guess we'd have to ask the developer this, but will it keep that public plaza type atmosphere with the food court, with that massive public space? We know that the pedway is there and the CTA stations are there.
Mm-hmm. Well, in the news reports that I have read today, I've only read about the CTA station being retained. And I think that Elizabeth articulated it so well, that one of the most dynamic spaces is the atrium, as well as the public space that's used below. And we certainly support seeing this retain its public access so that people can still appreciate one of the most dynamic monumental spaces in our entire city. Instead of being able to just look in, we want them to be able to go in as well.
Elizabeth Blashes, we have about 30 seconds left, but Bonnie addressed this a bit. Do you think this is a catalyst for the Loop? Because everyone was kind of writing the Loop's obituary in terms of folks working from home, not going to the office anymore. Is this going to be the beginning, perhaps, of a rebirth?
We've seen many iterations of the Loop dying and coming back to life. I feel like the Loop is not dead, nor has it ever been dead. It's the neighborhood of everyone in Chicago. It is encouraging to see this large-scale renovation project happen sort of at the seat of government in our city. And it's also really great, I think, to have all of those folks sort of downtown in that area, particularly to kind of really refresh a lot of the pedestrian level retail spaces in the Loop that really, need to see more tenancy and need to see more active use.
Hopefully the start of something great for the Loop over the next several years. All right, our thanks to Bonnie McDonald and Elizabeth Blashes. Thanks for joining us.
Thank you.
Thank you.
The chilly relations between Russia and the U.S. now extend into the chilly reaches of space. Reuters reports that Russia says it will withdraw from the International Space Station in 2028. This just a day after the country said it was planning to leave in 2024. So what does this sudden back and forth mean for the future of the laboratory orbiting 250 miles above Earth? Joining us is Jordan Bim, a postdoctoral research fellow and space historian at the University of Chicago. Jordan Bim, first of all, just give us a brief history and synopsis of the U.S. and Russia's cooperation in the International Space Station with several other countries we should mention.
Yes. So it begins at the end of the Cold War. So everyone remembers the space race, the competition between NASA and the Soviet Union for supremacy in outer space in the 1960s. At the end of the Cold War in 1991, there was this moment of hope and optimism for cooperation in space and then perhaps cooperation on Earth. That gave birth to the concept of a cooperative space station, the International Space Station. The first modules were launched in 1998, and the first crews arrived in the year 2000. And since then, it has been continuously inhabited by humans, which is a huge accomplishment. So all of this uncertainty that has been kicked up in the last few weeks and months is quite sad, because it means that the station perhaps may not function for much longer.
Well, at first Russia says it's pulling out of this endeavor in the next 2 years, but then today it revised and said 2028 instead. What do you make of this discrepancy?
Well, the generous read is that the new head of the Russian space agency, Yuri Borisov, just wasn't properly briefed or didn't know what he was talking about. But the bigger picture here is just that Russia is becoming an increasingly unreliable and unpredictable partner for NASA and the International Space Station. And just like in space, you want predictable and reliable technologies and systems, you also want predictable and reliable relationships on Earth to support that laboratory. And we're not seeing that right now. So that means that NASA has to make some decisions and plan for some possible contingencies, of which it doesn't really know the whole picture right now. And that's never good when you're dealing with stuff in space.
Right, and as I understand, the whole space station can't operate without Russia's part. So what does this mean for the U.S. and for NASA going forward?
Well, this is another thing that comes out of that post-Cold War moment of cooperation. They designed the station so that it would have to run cooperatively. The systems were integrated in such a way that it would be very hard for it to function without one or the other partners. They were trying to promote that spirit of cooperation through the design of the station. So what that means is that NASA has to plan for contingencies of exactly how Russia will leave the ISS, and they haven't provided those details yet. So will they physically detach their modules, which is possible but very unlikely? Will they just deactivate them and seal them off, denying them use? Perhaps they will try and sell them to NASA the same way they were selling seats on the Soyuz capsule system in the 2010s. Or maybe they'll do something really nice and just leave the lights on and simply evacuate their cosmonauts. But each one of those different possibilities is a different set of problems that NASA has to deal with. And right now, they don't know what they're going to be facing or when.
And you said the whole point of this was to show that Russia and the United States and the West could cooperate in space. Perhaps they could cooperate on the ground. Clearly, Russia and most of the West not cooperating on the ground right now. Is that the whole reason for this announcement?
It really is. You know, we've seen increasing tensions in the last few years, but really in the last few months with Russia's war in Ukraine. And the previous head of Roscosmos, the Russian space agency, Dmitry Rogozin, made some very incendiary statements through Twitter and through other mechanisms, which really just frayed the relationship. NASA, for its part, tried to be the shock absorber and project stability and continuity. But there's only so much of that work you can do when your partner is just not being reliable, not being predictable, and not really acting in good faith.
Tell us some of the big revelations that have come as a result of the work of Russia and the U.S. and Japan and other countries up on the International Space Station, or some of the observations that have been done, some of the things that we now know because of the work done on the space station.
So it's not as flashy as a big human first, like the first human to set foot on the moon, or a big scientific discovery, but actually maintaining a continuous human presence in space for 22 years since November 2000 is a huge achievement. And what that's given us is a wealth of data on the human body in the microgravity environment of low Earth orbit. And that means a lot of medical and scientific data about the limits and capabilities of the human body in space. And that feeds directly into larger scoped missions into deep space to the moon and onto Mars. Now, besides humans, there's been a massive scientific program at the International Space Station. It is, of course, a U.S. national laboratory designated as well. So there's been lots of science done on biology, plant science, and zero-G, a lot of Earth imaging as well. So we've learned so much from the ISS, and it would be a real shame if operations there had to wind down early, not because the actual modules were broken or the systems were malfunctioning, but because the politics and the partnership had broken.
And you mentioned that, I mean, this is something that dates back to the post-Cold War period. We've seen private companies take over a lot of what NASA was doing in the public realm, SpaceX, Jeff Bezos' company. Is there a chance that those private entities might take over what the space station's been doing?
There is, and NASA has provided funding for a number of these companies to produce concepts for replacement orbital space stations. Companies like Blue Origin, like you mentioned, was one of those. Also, Axiom Space is planning to produce a module that will attach to the International Space Station in 2024, and perhaps that could be part of keeping the station operative without Russian support. Also, a company called NanoRacks and Northrop Grumman are also in the space station game now as well. The problem is space stations take a long time to develop and then launch. So none of these concepts will be ready to replace the International Space Station in 2024, or probably not even in 2028 either. So what we're looking at is perhaps a gap in America's capability to house astronauts in low Earth orbit in a space station environment.
And it seems like what Russia really wants here is the uncertainty on the part of the U.S. to just not know what the future is going to be here. Is there any chance they're bluffing?
There is, and you know, there's no coincidence that that chess is a very popular game in Russia. So perhaps this could be just a chess move in the wider chessboard of the war in Ukraine, the sanctions against Russia. That I wouldn't put that past them. This could easily be part of this. But the bigger picture is that they are projecting unreliability and untrustworthiness when those are two virtues that you absolutely need when you're managing a space station. They are vital. They literally, people's lives in space depend on these partnerships succeeding.
Yeah, if you're up in space, you don't want to have to doubt the trustworthiness of some of your partners up there. All right, a lot of interesting things to chew on. Jordan Bim, thank you so much for joining us.
You're welcome, Paris. Thank you for having me.
You bet. And up next, artists unite in a creative protest against the ongoing war in Ukraine. So please stay with us.
We've made it.
Justice Jackson's appointment to the Supreme Court provides a beacon of hope.
Black women are underrepresented. We still rise. We still show up for one another.
It's us investing in the next generation and giving them something to enrich the next generation with.
There's much more ahead on the program, including Spotlight Politics and the drama over who should lead Illinois' Democratic Party. But first, an art show near Ukrainian village is a cry of protest against the ongoing war in Ukraine. Artists from Chicago and Ukraine are raising their voices in opposition to the Russian invasion. Producer Mark Vitale visited the ARC Gallery for a look at life and art during wartime.
There's a sense of urgency in the new artwork and allusions to the past. One painting uses a World War II uniform as a canvas. Beyond the art in the physical gallery, there are virtual views of artwork from around the world made specifically for the show. The call for entries brought a big response.
I looked at all of the 325 images that were submitted by 89 artists, and I didn't make any kind of selection at first. I wanted to see what the tone was of all the work. And I recognized that each artist would have a highly personalized response to the call, which was to respond to the impact of war. We needed the voices of artists who were there, or who had experienced this trauma, or who were keeping diaries of events. The bombing of Mariupol had, we saw a number of kind of bombed out apartment buildings, and also in Kiev and Kharkiv and just all over. And there's this sense of kind of fate and randomness that occurs with war. I think whether you get hit with the bullet or your apartment's bombed or your neighbor's is random.
The exhibition is at ARC Gallery, founded by women artists in Chicago in 1973. Their latest show was selected by the curator of the Ukrainian Institute of Modern Art. Her mother was born in Ukraine before World War II.
My mother is from Poltava. She escaped during World War II, was allowed to emigrate, and we eventually ended up in Chicago. I'm first generation American, but I have coworkers whose mothers are in Kyiv, and, and they're calling every day to make sure that they're okay. So they're constantly getting updates, but we were also just traumatized by the news and glued to the media and trying to figure out kind of what do we do because we're here.
Documentary photos reveal life in an underground bunker. Other images bear witness to what is happening. The show is titled The Invisible Costs of War, and many works display a concern for children caught up in all wars.
The invisible costs of war are the emotional, behavioral, spiritual, psychological effects that sometimes appear a lot later. There's a very conscious awareness and fear of what this is going to do to the children that are living through this. Will they think that this is normal? Protecting children is part of Ukrainian culture, but also probably provoked by this kind of situation. Mothers really watch out for the children while the fathers are out fighting.
For Chicago Tonight, this is Mark Vitale.
The show is at the ARC Gallery on Chicago Avenue through August 13th. You can find out more on our website. And still to come on Chicago Tonight, our Spotlight Politics team on why Governor Pritzker is looking to replace Congresswoman Robin Kelly as chair of the Illinois Democratic Party. Animal welfare advocates want the Cook County Forest Preserve to do more for a stressed captive coyote. It's hot out there for everyone, but especially for outdoor workers. We'll talk about how to stay safe when working in the heat.
If we couldn't have this year-round, I think we can directly have an impact on violence.
And hear about a basketball camp that is taking back Chicago's streets while creating safe spaces for kids. But first, some more of today's top stories. The Federal Reserve is hiking interest rates again in an effort to curb decades-high inflation. The Fed has bumped its benchmark interest rate by 3/4 of a point for the second straight time. The Fed's move will affect mortgage and car loans as well as business loans and credit card interest rates. It's the highest that rates have been since 2018. The president is back to work in the Oval Office. Joe Biden tweeted his negative COVID test today after 5 days of testing positive.
My symptoms were mild, my recovery was quick, and I'm feeling great.
The president had been isolating but working remotely while he was infectious. His doctors say he'll continue to mask up when near others for 5 more days. Amazon workers in Joliet allege that the company failed to act against racist death threats at the retailer's fulfillment center. 26 former and current employees say Amazon allowed a racially hostile work environment, including death threats against black employees and workers who are allowed to wear Confederate flag clothing.
There is no sign more serious and more terrifying than a death threat in a workplace where white workers are allowed to wear Confederate flag outfits with impunity.
And pictures of graffiti employees found in the bathroom reading, quote, "N-word gonna die" and "F these N-word" were included in the workers' filing with the Federal Equal Employment Opportunity Commission and the Illinois Department of Human Rights. An Amazon statement says, in part, that, quote, "hate or racism has no place in our society and are certainly not tolerated by Amazon." Smashing Pumpkins frontman Billy Corgan is hosting a benefit concert for Highland Park shooting victims tonight. The concert will be held at Corgan's and his partner's Highland Park Tea Shop and performance space called Madame Zuzu's, which is around the corner from where the mass shooting took place. The benefit will be broadcast on the Smashing Pumpkins YouTube channel for free tonight at 8 p.m., but Corgan is encouraging viewers to donate to the Highland Park July 4th Shooting Response Fund. And the 4-day music fest known as Lollapalooza opens in Grant Park tomorrow. More than 170 acts and an estimated 500,000 fans are expected to attend. Concertgoers must provide a printed copy of their COVID vaccine card, vaccine record, or a negative test within 72 hours of entering. And with Illinois accounting for 10% of known monkeypox cases, city health officials are warning people to avoid skin-to-skin contact with strangers. For people driving downtown, there will be a number of street closures, including Columbus Drive from Monroe to Roosevelt. After concerns were raised about the welfare of a captive coyote earlier this year, the Cook County Forest Preserve now says it's making changes to the animal's living conditions. But advocates say that's not enough. WTTW News reporter Patty Wetley joins us now with more. Hey, Patty, so there's a coyote currently living at the River Trail Nature Center in suburban Northbrook. Remind us how this little guy got there and why advocates are concerned.
Yeah, well, he was rescued in 2018 in Tennessee and was mistaken for a dog. So for the first few weeks of his life, he was raised as a domesticated pet, which meant that he really could not be placed back in the wild. So that's when he wound up with the Cook County Forest Preserve District as part of their ambassador animal program. They have several animals, coyotes, birds, snakes, that they use to educate the public about our regional wildlife. But some folks became concerned when they saw the coyote. They felt his enclosure was far too small, and that they saw him pacing in what they felt like was the kind of pattern that indicated that he was being very stressed by his captivity. And they brought this to the attention of the Forest Preserve District, got a petition going, and created quite the hullabaloo around his care.
So maybe the captivity causing him to be a little restless and depressed. And the Cook County Forest Preserves did do a month-long review on this. What did it find, and what changes is it proposing to make for the coyote?
Right. So they interviewed experts from Shedd Aquarium, Lincoln Park Zoo, Brookfield Zoo, peer institutions. They brought in a pair of independent veterinarians who found that there were no health issues with the coyote and that his care met all regulatory standards. But they did have some recommendations, specifically that he could do with more room and possibly some companionship and more enrichment in his activities. And so the Forest Preserve District has pledged that within 2020, it will provide an expanded enclosure of like 2,000 to 2,500 square feet, giving him some space where he can remove himself from public view. They'll give him more challenging things to climb and make a more naturalistic environment for him. And overall, adopt a more current model toward the ambassador program overall, that Lincoln Park Zoo has pioneered, this sort of animal first paradigm where animals kind of have more control of how they can interact with the public and things like that.
And a lot of advocates are saying, well, that's okay, but not quite enough. What are they petitioning for?
Right. What they really want is for this particular coyote to be removed from the care of the Forest Preserve District and sent to a wildlife sanctuary in Colorado, where it would have more room, even more room, and definitely some companionship, which is something that the Forest Preserves hasn't 100% committed to, but is exploring. But they're keeping him in the Forest Preserves. The other folks want him out in Colorado.
All right, we'll see what happens to this coyote. Patty Wetley, thank you so much.
Thanks, Paris.
And you can read Patty's full story on our website. That's WTTW.com/news. A lot of political stories to get to this week. Google buys the Thompson Center. A battle for the leadership of the Democratic Party of Illinois pits Governor J.B. Pritzker against Congresswoman Robin Kelly. And Mayor Lightfoot hopes a multi-billion-dollar dome will keep the Bears from fleeing Chicago. Here with all that and more is our Spotlight Politics team, Heather Sharon, and special guest this evening, Hannah Meisel, the government and politics editor for NPR Illinois. Good to see both of you. Hannah, this deal between the state and this group Prime Real Estate, it was announced a few months ago, and then it shifted today with Prime Real Estate announcing that Google is going to be the tenant. How did this come about?
Right. So in December, after, truly months, years of negotiations, Governor J.B. Pritzker is not the first governor who has wanted to sell the Thompson Center. In December, they announced that Prime Group would redevelop the Thompson Center into a mixed-use retail, hotel, office space, and the state would retain office space there. But basically today they said, we found a much better deal. Google is going to come in and take 100% ownership of the Thompson Center. The state will get $30 million cash and then move 3 blocks south on LaSalle to the old Yomo Harris building. So this is, everyone who was involved, they said this is a much better deal for Chicago. And truly, as one of your guests in the earlier segment said, this is good for downtown, being able to, one, infuse jobs, but also, of course, you have that secondary market of jobs that, it depends on, folks working downtown. And of course, people are very worried about that.
You've got restaurants, you've got tailors, you've got coffee shops. Heather Sharon, everyone, as I mentioned earlier in the show, everyone seems to write the obituary for the Loop. Why is Google making such a big bet that the Loop is going to be the destination for young, skilled tech workers?
Well, they've done it before. So back when they moved their operation, which was really a tiny operation from River North to the Fulton Market District, no other tech firm was in Fulton Market. And they made that the hot, hip, happening neighborhood that we all know today. And they think they can do the same for the Loop and really bring new life to downtown Chicago and make Google a fun place to work for people who want to be in downtown Chicago. But Hannah's right. This is a huge bet on downtown Chicago at a time when both the mayor and the governor were facing real criticism that it was not going to recover from the pandemic, as everybody likes working remote at least some of the time, as well as a significant uptick in the number of violent crimes downtown. This is something both Lightfoot and Pritzker will put in their caps as they run for re-election.
The Loop becoming a hot tech hub. I mean, that really is a sea change. Hannah Meisel, we also talked earlier in the program about concerns over keeping that public space, those restaurants, the food court, the atrium where people go and protest government. Do we know anything about this deal and what it says about keeping those public spaces?
I don't think there were no solid commitments made this morning. I think everyone recognizes that this is an important architectural space. Obviously, you had the folks that you had on earlier who for years have been fighting to keep the Thompson Center around in some iteration. But what's really interesting to me is this selling the Thompson Center was first proposed in 2003. Ex-Governor Rod Blagojevich wanted to sell it to help balance the state's budget. Of course, former Governor Bruce Rauner had used the assumed
he baked it into his budget before he had any buyers.
Exactly. And it's been this kind of symbol that folks who, the ones who want to keep the narrative up of Illinois, falling off a fiscal cliff and, becoming irrelevant. And, it's been very symbolic. And truly, there's a press room there. I've worked there many days. It is not a pleasant place to work, but
it's not in good shape, Hannah, but as you have, I've spent a lot of time there. There certainly is a charm about that building, and if they can get it into working order, it might be a fun place to work, perhaps, if you go back there. All right, let's move on to our other story tonight. At a time when you think the Democratic Party would want to be full of unity going into the midterms, it's anything but in Illinois. Governor Pritzker is adamant about booting the Illinois party chair, Congresswoman Robin Kelly. Here's a little bit of what Pritzker had to say yesterday.
Kelly and support her in many ways. It's just we need to reconfigure the way the leadership is here. And so, I'm excited about her. I'm hoping that she'll be willing to be federal chair of the party because we need somebody to help us on the federal side while we also have somebody on the state side.
So, Heather, the committee people in the Democratic Party are going to get together and vote on this on Saturday. Why is Pritzker so adamant that he remove Robin Kelly and put his preferred person in there?
Well, he came out publicly and today endorsed State Representative Lisa Hernandez. He says that they need somebody who is not a federally elected official, who is free from federal restraints on raising campaign cash, to take charge of that operation, to make sure that the state Democratic Party can raise as much money as it needs to win not only all statewide elected offices from governor on down, but also 2 Supreme Court races, which could decide the fate of abortion access in Illinois and therefore much of the Midwest. So he was not in favor of Robin Kelly back in March 2021 when she beat his preferred candidate, Alderman Michelle Harris of the 8th Ward, and he is taking another run at it. And this time, he's got a full court press going, and the knowledge that he is the state Democratic Party's biggest donor And that carries a good deal of influence.
Right, you saw a lot of labor groups agree with Pritzker and back his candidate. Let's hear Robin Kelly's response.
We have it together. We are doing a great job. I've only been around, I was elected 16 months ago. We had a executive director, 3 months after that. We are putting a foundation in place.
So she's saying, hey, we have been raising money. We're putting a foundation in place. I haven't been here that long. And the forces that support Congresswoman Kelly, Hannah Meisel, they criticize the fact that Pritzker wants to go with this state representative, Lisa Hernandez, who was seen as a Madigan acolyte in the past. Is that a fair criticism here?
Well, I mean, it's hard to say. I think that in a lot of ways, since former House Speaker Mike Madigan, who of course was also chair of the Democratic Party for years and years, in his absence, it's hard to the criticism doesn't necessarily have as much punch as it used to. And truly, Lisa Hernandez, she handled the redistricting fight for the House Democrats all of 2021. She is seen as, kind of an emerging leader. She makes deals. I think that, those who support Congresswoman Kelly, including, of course, U.S. Senator Dick Durbin, they won the fight last year, but only just barely. And, in the fight to, take over in March 2021, people had a lot of reservations about a sitting congresswoman, as Heather said, being elected because you can't raise that money. But
because of federal laws limiting what she can do outside of federal races. All right, well, let's move on to the news of Lightfoot proposing a dome over Soldier Field. Here's a little bit of what the mayor had to say on Monday.
I feel very confident that hopefully the Bears will see that there's an overwhelmingly compelling financial case for them to stay in Chicago.
So this could cost anywhere between $900 million and $2.2 billion, although we know it's going to cost more than that because those things always do. Heather, Sharon, are you as confident as the mayor is that this is going to perk the Bears' interest and keep them from going to Arlington?
I have not talked to anyone besides the mayor who thinks that the Bears are going to take this proposal seriously. And that is for several reasons. One, they are contractually obligated to only negotiate with the Arlington Heights racetrack owners and to make that deal finalized. They have until February of 2023 to make that deal. And it's really unclear what could get the Bears to sort of drop those plans and come back to the city to explore these. It's also unclear about just how much taxpayer money the mayor is willing to support toward this project. And you and I have talked about this before, Paris. The city is still paying off the 2003 renovation of Soldier Field. There is almost $400 million still due on that tab. And I'm not clear how another taxpayer subsidy for Soldier Field gets through something like the city council or passes muster with the public.
30 years of paying for that current Soldier Field rehab. Heather, it's been brought up by a few stadium experts that the best pitch for the Bears would be to say, here's a big plot of land, go build whatever you want on it from scratch. Is there any notion that that's an option the mayor's administration is looking at?
There's no indication that she is at all interested in another location for the Bears. And this is in part because the mayor really wants to reactivate that museum campus. She sees that as sort of an underutilized jewel in the city's crown. She wants it to be easier to get there from public transportation, and she wants that to be a year-round attraction, which is something she also wants for Soldier Field. It's just not clear who would anchor Soldier Field as a tenant if it wasn't the Bears. Of course, there's the Chicago Fire, but, sometimes soccer isn't quite as popular as the beloved Bears.
All right, Heather, we've got 30 seconds, but I have to ask you about this other issue. Mayor Lightfoot is blocking the creation of a police oversight board that, by the way, she called for when she was head of Mayor Emanuel's Police Accountability Task Force. Why is she blocking this now?
We're not sure. She's had more than 2 months to review the 14 nominees selected by the City Council to serve on an interim commission before the first elected officials take part in this community oversight board. She says she's still working through vetting those officials, but it's important to note that this ordinance, which was passed more than a year ago, every single deadline in it has been missed at a time where you and I have covered again and again misconduct allegations and scandals in the Chicago Police Department, which this commission was designed to solve.
All right, well, we know you will keep following this, and our thanks to Heather Sharon and Hannah Meisel. Thank you so much for joining us. And up next, what to know about workers' rights in dangerous heat. That's a conversation that first aired on Chicago Tonight Latino Voices with guest Alex Hernandez of Univision. But first, we take a look at the weather.
As we head towards summer's peak and temperatures routinely reach the 90s and above, people who work outdoors are at increasing risk of overheating. And it's not only people like farm workers and construction workers who are at risk. A UPS driver in Arizona was recently caught on security camera here, collapsing from the effects of heat illness after spending hours in his hot van. Joining us now with more are Nick Theodore, professor and head of urban planning and policy at the University of Illinois, Chicago; Maggie Rivera, president and CEO of the Illinois Migrant Council; and Bogdan Katalin, supervisor in the Enforcement Programs Unit of the Occupational Safety and Health Administration Chicago Regional Office. Thank you all for joining us today. And I want to start with you, Maggie. How big of a problem is heat stress for farm workers here in Illinois?
Well, customarily, it's a big problem for the farm workers that are working in the farms when the temperatures rise above 100. Particularly here in the Midwest, you add the moisture into it, so it becomes very unbearable. So it's a hazardous problem and a health problem for our farm workers.
Bogdan, what are the symptoms of heat stress that people should look out for in themselves and others?
It's important to note that heat affects us all regardless of age, whether we work indoors or outdoors. Some of the symptoms can be mild and reversible. Some can be severe, fatal even. They can range from heat rash, like red dots on your arms, to fainting, to fatigue, dizziness, and vomiting, all the way to heat stroke, which is fatal and begins with confusion, slurred speech, seizures, and very high body temperature.
Nick, what would you say are the job categories that are at risk for heat stress, and what kinds of people typically work in these professions?
Right. Well, there are a number of occupations, both indoors and outdoors, that are subject to heat stress and heat-related illness. Indoor occupations like factory workers and warehouses, bakeries and laundries. Outdoor work like agricultural work, construction work, landscaping. All of these potentially encounter very high temperatures and put workers at risk.
Right. And speaking now about employers, Bogdan, what are their obligations to their workers when it comes to keeping a safe working environment in the heat?
For sure. Employers have an obligation to provide a healthy and safe work environment regardless of the workplace hazards or exposures. OSHA's message is simple: water, rest, shade. Employers should encourage workers to drink water frequently, take frequent rest breaks in shade or air-conditioned break rooms, have an emergency plan ready to respond when a worker shows signs of heat-related illness, allow them to build tolerance for working in heat, especially new employees or those returning from extended breaks, and certainly keep up to date with the weather forecast or warnings to adjust, when possible, the intended work schedules, such as starting earlier in the day when it's cooler. And not to forget, training workers on the hazards of heat exposure and how to prevent such illnesses.
Right. We actually spoke with Leticia Martinez with the Illinois Migrant Council, who conducts heat safety training for workers and employers. She says that though most employers she deals with want to ensure safety for their workers, the workers don't always feel comfortable saying they need to take a break. Let's listen.
Especially for those individuals that are new and it's their first year doing the field or the work or the farm labor. So when it's their first year, they're not very familiar with everything. And they think that if they speak out, they might lose their job or they might get in trouble or they might get reprimanded for this, when in fact they will not. But this is what, they believe. So they definitely have to have someone out there that knows the signs and can help individuals who can't relate to the employer because of language barriers.
Maggie, what is the IMC doing to help workers feel comfortable advocating for themselves?
Well, for a number of years, literally since our existence, we have been going out to the camps where we actually bring our team members like Leticia, and we have, they are trained by a national organization called AFOP. And we have several of these team members throughout the state that we actually partner with the growers, and we go out to the fields and bring this education to the workers in several different languages.
Going back with you, Nick, you've studied the effects of heat stress on workers in other cities. Can you tell us about what you found, and also are there similar patterns here?
Yeah, I think what we're finding in a number of our studies is that workers in a range of industries are feeling a lot of pressure to keep on working regardless of the conditions. So I'm talking about the delivery driver that is being monitored closely to make sure that enough routes are being run, or the construction worker that is feeling the pressure to complete a job. So if you just look at the Chicago area, we had an early June heat episode where the heat indices in Chicago were above 105, and in the outlying areas closer to 110 to 115, right? And so for those workers who are working on rooftops or pouring foundations or doing cement work, the temperature that they're facing could be 10 to 15 degrees hotter. There's a lot of pressure to get the work done, and too often workers are not getting the rest breaks, the water, and the basic protections that would keep them from getting heat-related illness.
Right. Maggie, if a worker believes they're working in unsafe conditions, what can they do?
They can contact us and provide us with the information, or let us know confidentially what's going on. We have over the years been able to build a very close report with a lot of the farm workers, so they feel comfortable in knowing that if they call us, they're not only going to get the help, but they are going to get their issues resolved without any kind of backslash against them.
Maggie, thank you. We have less than a minute, but I want to ask you both then about the OSHA that put a new program into place this year, the National Emphasis Program on Heat. Can you tell us a little bit about this program and what its goals are? We have about 30 seconds.
Certainly. It's in effect since April 8th of this year, and it contains both enforcement and outreach on compliance assistance elements, and it establishes heat priority days when the heat index is above 80 degrees Fahrenheit. And that's when our compliance officers will go out and engage in proactive outreach or technical compliance assistance with the employers.
Okay. Well, I want to thank all of you for your time today. Thank you, Nick Theodore, Maggie Rivera, and Bogdan Catalin. Thank you so much. Back with more Chicago Tonight right after this.
Don't miss one of our stories. Get them all delivered to your desktop or mobile device with a subscription to the WTTW News Daily Briefing. Go to WTTW.com/Daily Briefing and sign up.
Hoops in the Hood is taking over the streets of Chicago this summer by bringing kids and teens together to play basketball in their neighborhood backyards. Chicago Tonight's Joanna Hernandez learned more about the mission behind the program and the leaders who are driven to make a change.
At Salute Center on the far south side of Chicago, young hoopers come together to play ball. It's Coach Darnell Banks' first year participating in Hoops in the Hood.
I've had the privilege of having coaches, mentors, who kind of instilled in me, who poured in me some valuable things as far as being able to matriculate and become self-sufficient for self. And basketball happened to be the avenue for me.
Coach Darrell grew up on the city's south side and is one of many community leaders taking part in the basketball camp.
My job is try to get them to have an understanding of the cohesiveness between life and basketball, because they go hand in hand, actually.
Hoops in the Hood is an initiative that started back in 2006, aimed at providing safe spaces for kids to play basketball.
I look forward to this every year because it kind of highlights a lot of the really amazing things that grassroots organizations throughout the city are doing. You always hear about all the bad things that are happening. There's a lot of really good organizations within the city.
Alex Anaya is a coach and a recreational program officer at Local Initiative Support Corporation, known as LISC. He runs a league in Pilsen.
One of the biggest things about Hoops in the Hood is that a lot of the programming that occurs outside. We're inviting the entire community to participate and be part of the events so that they can see that the youth are doing something positive.
Every year, LISC partners with 17 neighborhoods and organizations within those communities to host summer leagues where hundreds of kids take part. Anaya says the program goes beyond learning basketball skills.
Keeping kids safe and out of trouble, you're saving lives. While you have them in the gym, though, you got to change their mindset about everything, including academics, including athletics, including the way they treat their parents, the way they treat their teachers, their communication with law enforcement, which is one of the things we're trying to highlight this summer as well.
Whether it's a local gym or an outside court, participants are going through various drills.
It's fun, and I came here to play basketball with my friends.
Other participants, like 10-year-old Sophia Khan, says she has her eyes on improving her skills for the big league one day.
I want to be the first girl to play actual games in the NBA, to show to other girls that it's possible.
And the program only happens in the summer, but community leaders who have been participating for years are working to have camps like this run all year long.
If we couldn't have this year-round, I think we can directly have an impact on violence. I think we will help reduce violence.
For Banks, coaching kids not only gives him an outlet to give back, but says it's an opportunity to help boys and girls develop goals on and off the court.
I would tell him or her to not be so hung on what's happening to you, and change your mindset and understand it's happening for you. All the things that you're experiencing are to teach you and show you who you are capable of being already.
For Chicago Tonight, I'm Joanna Hernandez.
And once the camp is over, the program hosts a citywide tournament where kids from all 17 neighborhoods participating come and compete. And we're back to wrap things up right after this.
Chicago Tonight is made possible in part by Alexandra and John Nichols, the Jim and Kay Mabey family, the Polk Brothers Foundation, and the support of these donors.
And that's our show for this Wednesday night. Please join us tomorrow night live at 7. Community leaders are paving the way for Spanish-speaking immigrants in Waukegan amid a delayed legal system. We stop for a visit as part of our In Your Neighborhood series. And comprised of more than 8 stages and 100 bands, we take you inside this year's Lollapalooza. And now for all of us here at Chicago Tonight, I'm Paris Schutz. Thank you for watching. Stay healthy and safe, and have a great evening.
Closed captioning is made possible by Robert A. Clifford and Clifford Law